capable of capturing images of breathtaking beauty of the natural world, the human landscape, and the intersection of the two. Drones are just that, a game changer, an innovative invention and a powerful video production tool. Shots that were once impossible, impractical, or just too expensive are now relatively easy to achieve. But drones are also an area of emerging and evolving regulation. Rules on how, where, and when to fly are constantly changing. The possibilities are nearly limitless, and the responsibilities are serious and sobering. Let's dive in. Well, thank you guys all for joining me today. My name is Devin Fehely. I am a reporter and anchor for KPIX5. I'm also a licensed drone pilot. I shoot my own video and edit my own video for the station for most stories that I do there. I am joined today by someone that was not originally part of the thing, but I said he's been my wingman and my friend for probably 25 plus years, and it just kind of made sense to have him be a part of the presentation as well. This is Kit Doe. He is a fellow drone pilot. He worked at Channel 5 for even longer than I did, until recently moving to Apple about 4 months ago. And we have been friends since we first met at San Jose State University. And we have worked at 3 different television stations together. First, at the earliest stages in the sort of the embryonic stage of our careers at Channel 11 in the South Bay, later at the Fox station in Atlanta, and then most recently at Channel 5. In all of those places, he preceded me, held the door open at least 2 of them to help get me in. So
yeah, I got you the job at in Atlanta and San Francisco.
All right, so come on in, find a seat. So he's going to be the moderator, kind of keep the conversation moving. We've got a number of videos that we're going to share with you today, and really kind of the overarching theme is the use of drones as a creative story production tool. And we've got a number of videos that will kind of highlight different ways in which you can use it for storytelling, for news gathering, and we'll go ahead and bring you along. Kit? So one of the questions that I often get asked, probably the 3 most common questions that we get, is how high can that go? How far can that go, and do you need a license? And the answer to the question of a license is not always a completely straightforward one. It is a maybe, or perhaps a likely that you would need a license. So the way that federal regulators, which is the FAA, looks at who needs to be licensed to be a drone pilot, it depends on what you're doing it for. If you are doing it for what they call recreation, basically for fun, it's a Saturday, I'm going to a park where other enthusiasts go and fly, and that's all that I'm doing it for, or I'm going on a trip to scenic fill in the blank, you don't need a license. There are rules that govern how and where you fly, even if you don't have a license, but as soon as it becomes something that you do for what they call a commercial purpose, for a business. So if you're flying for a television station, if you're taking aerial photographs for a real estate agent, if you are doing it for a film or video production of any kind, anything where there is compensation, monetary or otherwise, that is now a commercial use, and yes, you do have to get a license to be in compliance. It's called a Part 107 license. It is, in essence, in many regards, it's very much like getting a pilot's license, but probably a little less rigorous and a little less time-consuming. But much of the knowledge, much of the information is sort of common to getting a pilot's license. People often kind of want to know, well, how hard is it? We've all gotten it. So you get your initial license, then every 2 years you have to basically do some recurrent training and get re-licensed, recertified every 2 years. It does involve some level of diligence and study because it's complicated things like airspace and how weather conditions affect the performance of drones and things of that nature. Why don't you go ahead and roll the next video? Yes?
How about, is there anything involving frequencies or anything like that?
Yes, because there are things where you can, it will sort of guide you as to how you can perhaps listen to air traffic control and things of that nature. The drones commonly use some of the Wi-Fi frequencies, but more than anything else, there's information specifically that would be relevant to listening to air traffic control that might be something that would, and that kind of dovetails with what's going to come next. So this mostly shows my skill as a clip art animator, which is very, very rudimentary. But the purpose of this, in just a second, is just some very, very basic information about airspace. The airspace around any airport, be it a large commercial airport or a smaller municipal airport, is going to be something that is controlled. And all of the regulations, in a nutshell, and there's a lot of them, but they have two basic goals and purposes, which is keep that drone away from other aircraft, be it the big aircraft that you fly to Hawaii, the smaller aircraft that flies in and out of your local municipal airport, the helicopter that's used to take a patient to the hospital or the police doing surveillance. Keep the drones away from those, because it would not be a good thing for your drone to interfere or to crash with one of those aircrafts. And then secondarily, to make sure that the people on the ground are protected from injury and damage to property. And basically, people will often ask, how high does it go? It can go hundreds of feet, perhaps even thousands of feet up in terms of how physically high it can go. Generally speaking, under most circumstances, you're supposed to keep it under 400 feet. And there's a really sort of simple reason for that, which is basic commercial aviation begins at 500. So if the ceiling for a drone is 400, then there's basically a 100-foot buffer. And if you stay beneath that, you should be staying out of the places where planes and helicopters and other things are flying. We got a couple questions in the back.
Do they have altimeters on these things so you know whether it's 400 feet or not?
Oh, absolutely. So when I fly, and there were supposed to be some drones that were kind of set up here, but just imagine. So you've got the drone, you've got the controller, and then my controller when I fly is connected to an iPad. Mostly what I'm seeing on that screen is principally what the camera view is. But there's also other things that will tell you the height that you're at, which is really important. And then also usually there's an embedded map that will tell you where you are, where the drone is relative to where it took off from and its direction of travel. And those are all sort of important navigational tools that you may use to greater or lesser degrees in every flight, but that information is always available to you. Yes?
How do you choose between using a drone and a helicopter? And is there an ethics issue with making that choice?
Explain to me a little bit more about what you mean about the ethics of the choice.
Do people on the ground freak out if they see a drone?
Yeah, they do. They do. So there's a lot of there's a lot of common sort of misunderstandings about the difference between property rights and airspace. Just like there is, and some of those some of that misunderstanding or some of that confusion is operative sometimes, even when you're not using a drone. Very often, and Kit can attest to this, people will say, you can't film my house, or you can't film this building, or you can't film what's going on 100 feet away from you on a public street. And then you kind of have to politely educate that person that technically I have a right as a journalist to film or to record anything that would be, viewable, kind of from a public area. Now, I think that as a general rule, and there are some rules that kind of that govern this, at least in this state, in terms of kind of paparazzi rules. Like you wouldn't want to be, in someone's backyard 5 feet away from their kitchen window. I don't think that's really it's not a good practice, and I think it is probably technically against the law. Now you could, I don't want to get too far off topic, but I was doing a story about global warming, rising sea levels, and notions in coastal communities that some of the places where people currently live or have built may be unsustainable on a timeline that's long enough. And so I was along a stretch of what's called West Cliff Drive in Santa Cruz, and there was this beautiful home that was in a bend in the road, and I just kind of wanted some video of these beachfront homes, and I was very cognizant of the fact that I didn't really want to cross their property line just as a matter of respect, but I wanted to get video that was reasonably close to where these homes were. And one of the homeowners got really upset and said he was going to call the police, and I was trying to sort of explain that, that I hadn't crossed into his yard, that he didn't own the air above his home, all of these things, and that we were doing a legitimate news story, and that in all likelihood, the police or the sheriff, if they were called, would tell him the same thing. But people kind of, there's a balance, right? So.
Did you get the shot?
I did get the shot. Now, and very briefly, as a practical matter, because we don't have a ton of time, the effective range sometimes a helicopter is going to get is much greater. So you have to be probably within a mile to a half mile, more reasonably, of what you want to film in order to film it. A helicopter, as a practical matter, has a greater range, and so sometimes it's just more effective to use the helicopter. And you're going to see here in some of the videos that I'll show you, but there's some things that a drone can do that a helicopter's never really going to be able to do. All right.
I think one thing that Devin and I have had to do over the years. By the way, Devin was the #2 drone pilot for news in the Bay Area. I was #3. So we've been doing this a long time, and if you guys decide to go this route, know that you're going to be ambassadors, that you have to protect the future of the way that drones are used in news, that you're going to come across a lot of friction in the public, and you have to de-escalate. You have to manage that, because there very well could be an upswell of public pushback. They talk to their council member, their county board of supervisors, and next thing you know, you're drawing a lot of heat on a very valuable news gathering tool. So just know that if you have this in your hands, it's a big responsibility, but it's also a fantastic way to tell stories.
Have you guys, either one of you, gotten any pushback from law enforcement from using a drone, or someone pissed off property owner did call the police, and you had some pushback from law enforcement when they came, anything like that?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. Sometimes law enforcement, because this was sort of an emerging technology and the rules were changing, law enforcement wasn't always crystal clear on what the rules were. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of things where the media has kind of a handshake agreement with a fire department or a police department in terms of what we're not going to ethically show. So if police officers are moving into a home because they're to arrest someone, as a handshake agreement, we wouldn't show that from our helicopter, nor should we show it from our drone, right? If there is an active fire, you don't want to be in the way of someone that is a fire department that's trying to put out a fire. And they do have some means. They can put up what they call a temporary flight restriction, which would basically say it's not permittable to fly in that area at that time because there's something that's going on. So some of it, there's hard rules, and some of it is a courtesy, and some of it is a negotiation, frankly. Let's go ahead and, I'm going to set up this next video. So this kind of the next part that we're going to talk about is what really makes for a great video, right? And I think in the most simple terms, it's how you compose the shot. Go ahead and pause it there, kid, for just a sec. How you compose the shot and the quality of the lighting. Those two elements are the basic things that determine if you're going to create an image that's effective, an image that's eye-catching, right? And composition, when you're using a drone, is actually more complex than if it was just a still photograph or video, because the drone is moving through space, right? What you see initially is not what you're going to see at the end of necessarily the end of the image. And so you kind of need to think about these things as you're creating that video. The clip that we're going to show you is kind of the closing segment of a story that I did about a ghost town in the southernmost part of the San Francisco Bay Area, kind of in the area of San Jose and Milpitas. It's called Drawbridge. And it was a community that was a small but thriving community about 50 years ago. There was a train stop that went through. When the train stopped going through, the community kind of just sort of slowly went away, but some of the buildings are still there. And so why don't we go ahead and roll that.
In the dying light, what little is left of Drawbridge comes to life, painted in a palette of amber and bronze. Its weathered walls and rusted roofs now a canvas for trespassing graffiti artists eager to declare, "I was there once," and that they share with the spirits of this place. And Drawbridge, Devin, Fehely, KPIX 5.
So that closing, you can keep the lights down. The closing shot's going to continue to play. You can go ahead and continue to play it. I'll highlight something. In terms of the composition, it's a fairly, I think, effective but simple composition. If you guys kind of understand rule of thirds, it's really almost at that diagonal right there. This is shot probably in what we call golden hour. It's that time about an hour before sunset, where you've got really nice directional light on the front of the building, kind of, just sort of painting it in this nice, really sort of golden palette there. And the move is a relatively simple move. It begins in tight, and it's just a reverse and an elevation. But I think it just sort of, to me, why I just thought it was a pretty shot, to be perfectly honest, but also I think it does communicate sort of the desolation of this area, right? You've got this weather-beaten building that's left out there that's at risk of collapsing at any moment, and nothing else surrounding it other than, you can kind of see some of the other remnants of the buildings that would have been in that area. Just go ahead and play it through to the, oh, you're starting.
That was the end.
Oh, that was the end? Okay, so let's go to the next one. And so that's composition. That was kind of composition and lighting all at once. This next one is really just a juxtaposition of the same building shot on 2 different days. This is the Salesforce Tower, obviously. This is shot on a bright, sunny day, and the colors just kind of pop. They're vibrant. And then the juxtaposition, same building, different day, overcast, as it often is up in the city. And I think it's an interesting shot. I mean, just sort of like the geometry of the different things, but it's very clear that in that second image that the quality of the lighting, because it's overcast, it's just the colors don't pop as much. They're not as saturated, they're not as vibrant. And so I always think it's some combination of what are you showing and then what are the lighting conditions. And if you're on a day turn and you don't have the luxury of going out and waiting for the perfect lighting conditions, this shot's fine. But if you're working on a special project and you have the time, then why not wait until it's the hour in the morning when it's going to be shining on the right side of the building and it's going to bathe it in that pretty light, or towards the end of the day, or even in the opening sort of segment where you saw the folklorico dancers. That was shot at noon because the shot was going straight down, and that's generally like a really good time. And you got really nicely saturated colors because the light was going in the same direction that the camera was pointing. Now,
Can a drone do a tilt?
can it tilt the camera?
Can it do, because there's Peter Hovey, who was a cameraman in the 70s, did the shot when they were excavating for some building next to the Transamerica building. And it actually, one of the gold rush ships was in that excavation.
Okay.
And he does tilt, he goes from the top of the Transamerica down to the excavation.
Ah, yes. So
Awesome shot, but I'm just wondering if
So typically, and I'll go ahead and break this out, most commercial drones are going to have, this is the controller, as you guys see here, and on the right, there's two joysticks, a right and a left. The one on the right pilots the drone forward and backwards, and also left and right. And then the one on the left side either has it go up or down, or turns it to the left, turns it to the right. And then it also additionally has something on the front here which allows you to tilt. So you can do a combination of moves. The move that you saw with the ghost town, that would be reversing it on the right side and going up gradually on the left. And so you could pair that if you wanted to get more sophisticated. If you can work three fingers at once, you could also tilt. And there's an infinite number of types of drones and levels of sophistication. There are drones that have a controller for two different people. So one person is piloting the drone, the second person is actually operating the camera. And that, as you can imagine, sort of unlocks a whole host of different creative ways that you can do it when you've got two people handling discrete parts of the operation.
Is it all autofocus?
Yes, it is. So generally speaking, if you wanted to have it focus on one particular part of the frame, you can tap your screen and there will be a focus, just almost like on your phone, where it knows to focus specifically on that. If you do nothing, generally it's going to be center weighted, and whatever is center of frame is going to be in focus.
Pilot's license?
Yes, you need a remote pilot's license. Yes.
And they cost normally for people who are trying to get those kind of licenses?
The cost is really not that prohibitive. So for our station, one of the things that we've done is that we have a company called Dart Drones, which has basically teaching modules, and there's about a dozen of them. And so I don't know how much that portion costs, but it mirrors the information that the FAA puts out. If you were really dedicated and studious, you could just absorb the material straight from the FAA. And then when you initially are licensed, you do have to pay for a test, usually administered at one of our local airports. So it's nowhere near as expensive as, for example, getting your actual pilot's license to pilot a plane.
Is it actual courses that you took in designated areas or be
It really depends, but basically all of the information the FAA has kind of laid out on its website. And then there are companies that will obviously kind of guide you through that, and they've created sort of teaching modules that sort of maybe walk you through the material. And you'd have to kind of investigate what made the most sense for you. Yes?
Are any of the drones programmable for the moves they could do from point A to point B?
Yes, and they have something that they call intelligent flight modes, where, like in the simplest example, you can orbit around a building, and generally the way that you do that is you set a point of rotation and then move the drone at some distance from that point, and it will rotate at a continuous speed. Let me get back to you in just a sec. Let's go to this. So one of the things that people often want to know is, well, how high can it go? And as I told you, it can go hundreds of feet up, right? I think probably the highest that I've ever put mine up was about 1,200 feet. And you might say, well, wait, you just violated the rule that you said. There is an exception that if you are flying around a structure, so Salesforce Tower, for example, you can go 400 feet above that structure in an orbit of 400 feet, basically. So that, so if there's a building that's taller than 400 feet, you can, when you're close to that building, go higher. Because if you think about it, no plane is going to fly at 400 feet around Salesforce Tower, not long or not successfully, right? But I call this one slow and low, in part because Kit loves barbecue, but also because I am of the opinion that sometimes some of the most interesting videos are much closer to the ground. I don't usually go up to 400 feet. If I need a wider shot, like a scenic vista, I might go to 250. But a lot of times, I'm somewhere between 50 and 100 or even lower. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Even a quick look at Seacliff's beloved but battered pier tells you virtually everything you need to know. Almost everything.
Was video from later in that story, but kind of what I was trying to illustrate a little bit is there's other ways to show this same stuff, right? I mean, I think these other ones are really interesting. This is actually shot from the drone, from the ground before I launched it. And the other one was with my regular camera. But I think in terms of an opening shot, to me, I think there's nothing more effective than being slightly under that pier that's about to fall down. And once again, this is a really simple move. I always think that sometimes the simplicity of the move, if it's done with intention and artfully, is better than something super fast and something where you're moving something around and it's jerking around. This is just, I'm standing in the surf back here, sort of water lapping at my feet. I've lined the drone up with the lifeguard tower, and I've flown it a little bit underneath, not a whole lot underneath, but just enough underneath, and I'm just slowly reversing it right side, and as I'm doing it, slowly going up. So it's coming back. The camera is coming backwards and just up to reveal the lifeguard tower.
Almost.
And then I wrote my opening line long enough to let the drone thing breathe and put a little bit of gnats under it. So let's roll. Before we roll this next one, I will set it up. It's probably one of my favorites. I mean, I got a lot of favorites, but this is close to the top of one of my favorites. This was a story that was about a winery. I don't think it was the main wine country fires. I think it was a year later. But a fire had gone through this area, and it burned the vineyards, and it burned their tasting room, and there was one building that was left standing. Strangely enough, it was the oldest building that was on the facility, and it was made completely out of wood, and somehow just by serendipity it was spared by the fire. This was a sculpture that they had at the winery, and obviously it didn't burn. And part of the reason I wanted to do this story was it sort of highlighted to me the ways that this community had kind of come together and helped this business, even while it was in ruin, sort of stay afloat. And it became almost like a community center for people. They would come, they would taste the wine, they would, sort of share war stories and rebuilding stories, and so why don't we go ahead and play this?
And so we got some material in there that we could salvage to put into a sculpture.
Yeah, so you can leave the lights down. It replays minus the track. So all of this corrugated metal was from, I think that's where they had stored the wine, and you can. I think it just sort of tells the story.
So they built the sculpture after the fire?
No, the sculpture was there before, but it survived.
But he said something just now about building a
Oh, okay. So he was saying that he's got a number of different wineries, and he was talking about potentially trying to salvage something from here that might be incorporated into a new sculpture. And when I was watching this, that made me think I've got to check back to see if that ever happened, because that's like the part 2 of the story. But I just kind of loved it because it just sort of slowly reveals. And I told you that composition, when you're doing a drone, is different than just a single image, because you kind of start and you're on tight on that sculpture, and as you kind of pull back, you see more and more and more and more of just kind of the burnt out ruin of what the rest of the grounds look like. And I'll highlight one other thing too. So I am the ultimate perfectionist on special projects, right? Like I want like every single shot to be as close to perfect as I want. I love this shot. Now, throughout the day, like the clouds are sort of rolling in, rolling out. So some of the other video that I shot during the day was shot in bright sunlight. When I was doing this was kind of overcast. And I actually drove back out a second day, because this was kind of a special project that I sort of had on a back burner, and it wasn't going to be ready until I kind of said it was ready. And I tried to recreate it on a sunny day. I waited, like I kept looking at the forecast and all these other kinds of things. And I should have, I don't have it with me, I wish I did, but like I could never recreate it. I was like, this is just better, because it just kind of, like it's just so smooth as it sort of flows over the ruins. When I went back like 2 weeks later, I was like, well, these are the lighting conditions that I want. These are optimal, but it just.
It speaks to the mood of the whole story.
Yeah.
The gray sky.
Yeah.
You were struck by it.
Yeah, because I mean, like, and this is not close. This is like Healdsburg. It's like 2 hours away. I got up super early in the morning and like was like dedicated to trying to do it. And it, I just ultimately went with this because it worked.
What do you know about the sculpture? Like, what is that?
So this actually, like, this debuted at Burning Man, and they call it Lord Snort. That's kind of the nickname that they have for it. There's another one that he's got at one of his other wineries that I think is maybe like, it might be like a coyote or something like that, but it's from the same sculptor. I thought it was awesome, and the thing was, it's got a pedestal here, and it rotates, so it could theoretically face this way. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Don't quote me on this, but I think I rotated it so that it was facing the right way for this shot. Like it may have been pointing out that way a little bit more, and I probably swiveled it.
Is it made of metal?
Oh, we got a wrap?
No, let's keep going.
What's our cutoff time?
Well, all right, so here's the thing. If anyone needs to or wants to leave before we finish, you can. And we'll just keep going. All right. So before we go, because the next thing is, we got one more on slow and low. Let's go ahead and play this. I'm going to actually have Kit talk about this one after we're done.
Chinatown?
No. It should be the
City Hall.
City Hall. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, he is a great drone pilot. He's threading the needle. And if you look in the right corner, there's a clue.
So that's actually me on a one-wheel electric skateboard, holding the drone. Holding the drone.
This totally changes the visual vectors,
Yeah.
with all of these drone shots. It's really,
So there's
see them together.
there's a couple things to kind of know about this. First of all, San Jose City Hall is in downtown, which is pretty close to the airport, so it's technically controlled airspace. So you could fly there, but you'd have to get extra permissions to do it because of its proximity to the airport. It's tough. It's not impossible, but it's tough to kind of thread the needle.
The same rule applies to being near military bases too?
Yes. And, for example, there's going to be what they call a temporary flight restriction, a TFR, every single time there's a Giants game. So if you get your drone, even if you're just doing it for fun, don't try and fly it over the Giants game because that's against the rules, or the 49ers game or anything like that. Federal buildings, if they're not in controlled airspace, then generally not. But like if you're in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building, the White House, all of those places are places that you're not allowed. There's like a permanent flight restriction around some of those buildings.
We're going to keep it moving. So one thing to note when you watch the next few clips here is Devin is super creative and obsessive about using the drone and bringing you and showing you different viewpoints. So if you guys decide to go down the drone route, just know it isn't always just a nice steady shot. It isn't of buildings and scenes like that. Just when in doubt, break the drone out and give it a shot. You never know what you're going to end up with.
All right, roll it. So that was for a story that I did about San Francisco's Chinatown during the first year of the pandemic. And there was a lot of different things that story was kind of about, but it opens with this montage of lion dancers. And one thing that I'll highlight, not all of this is shot on the drone. This one obviously is. That person was probably 20 feet up in the air, and so that was just kind of a cool way to do it. That's a GoPro. So I'm kind of filming this simultaneously from a number of different angles, and then also having them go through it a couple of different times and taking that footage, part of which is the drone. This is drone, that's drone, and mixing it with some of the other ones in what I think is kind of a creative way. This obviously felt really cinematic, kind of this top-down shot of her playing the drums.
Usually this saturated, or did you boost the color in?
The drone, the DJI drones are pretty saturated. Like they have a different, like some of the other ones that were the GoPros, like GoPros are very saturated and they have their own color profile. I was trying to match them a little bit, but the DJI drone I think it has great image quality and it's got great colors, and I think the colors are naturalistic enough. The GoPro, sometimes almost looks a little cartoonish, but I think it's interesting when you mix it all in.
You said matching it that's all part of post.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's show one more. We've got just two more, and then
How many cameras did you use for that?
I went nuts, and I probably had at least, we told them, but they want to stay for the last part of it. Yeah.
It's Daryl, he's getting nervous.
Yeah, no, I know. It's probably 5 or 6. I put an insane amount of cameras out there, enough to make me worry about doing it on a street in San Francisco and staying out there multiple times. But we just got 2 more. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. And you saw a little bit of this, but this is a longer clip of the footage.
The traditional male's role is very macho. And the women portray exactly the opposite, a very submissive role. There are very, very few strong roles.
So that story was a story about a traditional folkloric dance troupe in San Jose that was almost entirely comprised of members of the LGBTQ community. Now, this is a more traditional male-female partnering, but they would also have women dancing with women, men dancing with men as well. And once again, you can see one of my sort of stylistic kind of techniques, which is multiple cameras. I really sort of love the top-down drone shots because you just don't see that kind of dancing from that perspective. I also love this because my niece, who was about 10 years old at the time, was working the camera slider by the sombrero that we had placed there in the courtyard. So she was a part of that production as well. And we just have one more video. I know everybody is outside of this room is nervous about time. What?
Were the blue marks yours or were they?
I think I put a blue X in the center just so that they could start at a given point, and then that I knew that I would kind of be able to center the drone more readily over where they were. Yeah.
Devin, is that the drone you're flying right there?
Yeah. Yes. I'm Phantom 4 Pro. Yeah.
The fabric of faith has been similarly tested. Strained by the need to separate and the desire to connect, its fiber has proven surprisingly pliable. Like many places of worship, the daily Mass at Five Wounds has provided comfort to a virtual community of believers, far beyond the welcoming walls of this largely empty church.
So that was a story that I did. You can let that keep playing, Kit. There's actually like another example inside. And so a drone in some ways, I often think of it as, like it is new technology and it's wonderful, but it can function in the way are very similar to other existing technologies. A slider that has a near infinite slide to it, or a dolly, or a crane. Yeah.
Yeah, the up and down, you can control that so.
Yeah. And so this, I think certain stories kind of come to your life at the right time, right? Like this was early in the pandemic when everybody was kind of cut off from each other. And I heard about this church that was doing these virtual services. They had to quickly transition to them at the earliest part of the pandemic. And they were sort of amazed by the audience that they reached, not even just locally, not even their local parish, but across the world. And they were incredibly gracious and accommodating. And I would go there and I'd film stuff and they'd let me go up into the bell tower. We didn't see that, but they'd let me climb up there. And I asked him one day, kind of sheepishly, completely anticipating that the answer had to be no. Like, this is an historic church. It's over 100 years old. It's obviously gorgeous. You're going to let me fly the drone in here? And their answer was, of course. We'll finish the Mass and you do what you need to do. We'll clear out and you just do you. And I was so thankful for them.
That you didn't crash.
I mean, there's something, when you're flying inside, you're no longer flying with GPS. One of the things that I tell new pilots when you're flying outdoors is that if you ever get too close to something, if you're ever unsure of yourself, if you think you might crash, the best thing to do is just take your hands, take them off the sticks. Don't touch anything, because when you're flying outside and you're locked onto GPS satellites, the drone will simply hover in place. Now, it might be buffeted a little bit by the wind, but if you're not touching it, it should lock onto its position. Indoors, you don't have the benefit of GPS, so you're piloting it, and it could drift off. I mean, that's very possible, and I did not want to crash, and I did not want to damage anything, and I did not want there to be a drone-shaped hole in any stained glass windows. The one thing that I did, and you had asked about this before, in terms of intelligent flight modes and things that can be programmed. DJI, the latest version of the Phantom 4 and probably some of their other drones, has an intelligent flight mode that's called tripod, and basically what it does is it slows everything down. If I'm flying normally and I hit the right stick forward, it's going to dart off someplace. If I'm flying in that, where everything is kind of slowed down, even if I'm pushing it all the way up, it's just going to kind of slowly glide. So I went ahead and did that when I was flying indoors, because I was like, that's going to allow me to fly with more precision down that center aisle, and also, I'll be less likely to bump into something because it's a little less responsive. It's not so.
Devin, did you put the lights up in the interior? Or was it so that in the wide shot you could see, there's...
I think they had lights that were on, and they also had ambient lighting coming in from the stained glass
You
windows.
didn't have to do any extra lighting?
No.
because
Nope.
It's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
When it comes up a little bit, you see the sides.
And I think there are some lights that are recessed in some of these places. I also think that there's some lights there. I think there's some lights that are also coming in just from the stained glass in the rotunda as well.
But you didn't have to.
No, I didn't have to add any lights to it. Yeah. So we're technically done, but anybody that has a question can, yeah.
Well, quick comment and a question. When I was here in the mid-late 80s, there were so many, we had projects that we wanted to have a crane for. Even though Adolf Gassers would give us deals on, I don't even know if they're around anymore, but they would give us deals on certain things. We could never afford a crane, and it just, oh my God, to have that would have been amazing.
Oh, yeah.
My other question is, what about, rain? Can these fly in rain, or is that like a no-go?
Rain is tricky because electronics and water don't generally mix.
That's what I figured.
So generally speaking, I try and keep it out of the rain. When I was flying this week in Santa Cruz, just sort of looking at some of the repairs on Westcliff.
Did you get the mist?
And well, I waited until there was a break in the storm, but knew that at any moment that the rain could kind of come back in. It's not going to immediately fry it. So if you're in a place where it's not raining but could and it's close, the time that it takes it to come back, it's going to be fine.
What about those days in San Francisco where it's so misty, you kind of feel the water, but it's not actually raining, but just that, you know what I mean? That sort of misty.
Absolutely. I would say, so there is a requirement that you have 3 miles of visibility. So on those days where there is a lot or low fog, you're probably not really going to be able to fly it anyway. But if you fly it through mist or you fly it through a fog bank, it will come out of that, generally speaking, with some kind of condensation on the lens, which is less than optimal.